He titled it Something I Want My Neighbors to Know. And he starts with, I was born in the San Fernando Valley. I attended schools in Santa Ana and was reared with the American ideals. The concept of American democracy I learned in the public schools and gained from social environment in the community was about to fade away when the evacuation order was given.
My name is Cheryl Toff, a volunteer interviewer with the Kizuna Project. Today is April 5th, 2026, and I am in Tucson, Arizona with Mr. Austin Ken Yamada. Mr. Yamada, do I have permission to record you?
Yes, you have permission.
Where were you born, and can you share some background information about your Japanese immigrant family?
Yes, for one, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of my family's background, especially as it pertains to the internment of Japanese Americans during the war. I was born in Washington, D.C. in 1953 to Hatsumi and Lucy Yamada. My father was a son of Japanese immigrants who came to the United States from Japan around the turn of the century. They were uneducated, but took the opportunity to come to America to seek a better life. They came and worked as field laborers in agricultural business in Southern California at the time. My father was born in 1910. He had two sisters, Shigeko and Michiko, and as a family, they farmed the fields in Orange County in Santa Ana, California. My father's parents, Jusuke and Soa Yamada, were not very well educated and could not become citizens at that time because they were neither Caucasian nor black, which was the criteria at the time. So they could not become citizens, could not own land, but my father, because he was born in this country, was a U.S. citizen by birth. It wasn't unusual for Japanese families to send their children back to Japan for education, and my father was sent back to live with relatives in Hiroshima, Japan, around 1917. He remained in Japan for 8 years, attending grammar school and essentially through high school in Japan, returning in 1925 to rejoin his family in Southern California. I have a picture of my father dressed in his school uniform. It looks like he has a traditional Japanese school uniform on with a military style cap. I think it was fairly a formal portrait of my father at the time, and it wasn't unusual for the children to come back to the United States alone. I should note that as we speak here today, Cheryl, the U.S. Supreme Court is hearing arguments from the Trump administration about ending birthright citizenship, just to note.
So what was your father's life like when he reunited with his family in Los Angeles after being in Japan as a young boy?
So his parents, first generation Japanese Americans, were Issei. Children of the first generation are Nisei. Since my father had spent his school years in Japan, he was part of a group they called Kibe, which I think literally means return to America. Mm-hmm. But he was fluent in both Japanese and English. He was comfortable in both Japanese society and U.S. society. He attended junior high school and high school in Santa Ana, California. He attended Santa Ana Junior College for 2 years. And I've learned a lot about him, not from conversations we had, but after I found his high school and junior college yearbooks and went through, found out he was active on the football team, on the photography club, and very active in the Japanese American society at the time. Many pictures of my father show him with other Japanese Americans on vacation, taking trips, and just doing what teenagers tend to do. He became the de facto head of the Yamada household, as he was educated both in Japan and in the U.S. So he was very fluent in both languages, both cultures, very popular in high school. I deduced that from some of the sentiments written in his high school yearbook by his classmates. So I think he was a very popular young man, helped run the family business. Like I say, his parents were older and not in great health and weren't very fluent in English. So my father was kind of ran the business while going to school and working in the community. He became active also in the Japanese American Citizens League of Southern California, helped establish the JACL of Orange County in 1936, and actually served as its president in 1937.
So can you tell us, please, what was the Japanese American Citizens League and what role did it have in shaping your father's thinking?
So the JACL was, the National JACL was founded in 1929 to promote Japanese American citizenry and to help promote their fair treatment in U.S. society. It later became the target of criticism for being a little too, I'll say, a little too cooperative with the government and the authorities, and some of the Nisei especially resented the JACL's more compliant, I'll say, attitude at the time.
So would you say that your father led a stable life in the Japanese American community of Southern California prior to the outbreak of World War II?
Yes, I think you would classify him as a typical Japanese American. What made him atypical was his bicultural education and familiarity. Since he was Kibe, he knew Japanese, he understood Japanese culture and mannerisms, but being born in the U.S. and attending U.S. high schools and junior college, he was also very familiar with the U.S. culture. So he was, I'll say, a popular person in the Japanese American community in that he could operate on either side of the two cultures fairly comfortably.
So what changed for the family? What happened after Pearl Harbor that changed history for not only your own family, but for the Japanese Americans on the West Coast?
So sure, as the events of December 7th, 1941 unfolded, it changed everything for my family as far as I can determine. Executive Order 9066 gave general authority to the War Department to identify areas of the country that needed to be secured in order to protect the national security. They were afraid of sabotage primarily. So the War Department identified areas of the West Coast primarily, Washington, Oregon, California, from the coast to about 200 miles inland, as a restricted zone. And EO 9066 gave the War Department the authority to remove any and all persons from that designated zone. It didn't specify Japanese Americans, it didn't specify aliens or U.S. citizens, but it gave the authority to remove any and all persons. So the implementation of 9066 by the War Relocation Authority and General DeWitt, who was heading the effort at the time, resulted in the internment of about 125,000 Japanese Americans. Most of them were U.S. citizens. And there were about 10 camps spread across the U.S., mostly established on indigenous lands, Indian reservations, if you will, in Arizona, in California, in Wyoming, and other states as well. There were about 10 camps, and each family was given about 48 hours to divest their personal belongings and their property and report to a transfer facility where they would be relocated to their assigned location. My father's family left in May. So the proclamation order came out on April 30th of 1942. They were given about a week, maybe 2 weeks, to get all their finances in order and report for relocation. It was a very turbulent time. My father rarely spoke of it, but he did write a short missive about his experience in having to sell his belongings, report to the train station, and be transferred to the camp in Poston, Arizona, which is located south of Parker, Arizona, along the Colorado River, on the Colorado River Indian Reservation. So if I may, I'd like to read, and I do want to read this because it's pretty powerful. This is written in my father's own hand, and I'll read it as he wrote it instead of as it has later been edited, because I think it has a lot of the powerful personal feeling to it. He titled it Something I Want My Neighbors to Know. And he starts with, I was born in the San Fernando Valley. I attended schools in Santa Ana and was reared with the American ideals. The concept of American democracy I learned in the public schools and gained from social environment in the community was about to fade away when the evacuation order was given. Somehow, I managed to hold on to my emotions, and I want my neighbors to know that I did not lose my faith in the American way of life. I dreamed of a day when I can own a home, a permanent home, and a family, and enjoy peace. But it all came to an abrupt end with the Pearl Harbor incident. The civilian exclusion order issued by the Western Defense Command to evacuate any and all persons of Japanese ancestry followed. I sold everything under the roof of my house for 2 days, while the rest of the family packed. On the third morning, everything was in readiness to board the special train destined to a relocation center somewhere in the Arizona desert. I slept on the hard floor with just a newspaper spread, without the luxury of mattress or bed coverings on the last night in California. I didn't even bother to take off my clothing or change into a nightgown. Dawn began to glow across the clear sky, but showed early sign of summer. The date was May 10th, 1942. Breakfast was early, consisting of sandwiches Mother made the night before, and coffee. It was rather a poor breakfast compared to what I had been accustomed to eating every morning, but I needed the strength for the trip. As soon as I finished my share of eats, Mother reminded me, "Now load everything on the car and don't forget anything," as she knew that the family would not come back for some time. At least she thought the family would never come back together. When everything was in readiness to leave, a small group of neighbors began to assemble in the front of the house and was ready to bid the family a farewell. It was not a farewell to bid goodbye, but just to say so long. "Bye, Mrs. Yamada," Grace and Hatsi called Mrs. Smith, who lived next door. She had been a good neighbor ever since I can remember. "So long, Mrs." was all my mother could say before she broke into tears. My sister was already in tears and did not say a word. In all these years, I have never seen my father in tears, but he was shedding tears too. I started the motor and began to back out of the driveway. A group of neighbors who had come to see us off was standing at the entrance of the driveway. My mother kept waving until I turned the corner, and the neighbors were waving too, when I gave the last glance at the house as I turned. When I reached the depot, a 10-car special was already on the siding and waiting to board its passengers. The Red Cross had its temporary table set up and was serving coffee and donuts to early comers. A large group of exiles-to-be and curious spectators made the scenery like a crowd at an auction. After having finished unloading and clearing the car, I gave the car and car keys to the man who bought it from me. Later, I joined the family and waited to have the family number called. While waiting to see what was to take place next, Grace brought some coffee and donuts from the Red Cross table. Finally, military police called out the family number, which was assigned to every family on the evacuation order, and lined up the group in the order of the family number to board the train. The whole group of exiles-to-be was divided into 7 groups of about 60 persons each, including old and young, as well as citizens and aliens alike. 2 cars were loaded with baggage, and 1 car was loaded with box lunches to be served twice en route to the destination. Evacuees were loaded onto 7 coaches in orderly fashion and promptly on schedule. The special, loaded with its unusual passengers, pulled away from the station promptly at 8 a.m. and began to wind through the orange orchards among which I had lived so long. Soon, orange orchards disappeared and plain desert came into sight. At about noon, the train was rolling past some black, sun-baked heaps of lava in scenery surrounded by nothing but sand, sagebrush, and tumbling weeds. While the train cut through the open country, most passengers were growing tired. Some of the elders were sleeping, and some were reading. Most children were wide awake and occupying every vacant seat for their play. One little girl, about 8 years old, looking out the window, suddenly turned to her mother and said, "Mother, this place doesn't look like America. It's different." Mother looked rather surprised at the little girl's statement and did not say a word. "Where are we going, Mother? Are we going to another country?" said the little girl. The train crossed the river, and I knew I was no longer in California. I felt as if I was leaving America, which I love so much. I was being deprived of my right to enjoy the American way of life. It reminded me of what I learned in American history about the frontier days where pioneers were dispossessed of their settlement. They kept their faith and toiled. I want my neighbors to know I still love my America. I believe that missive that my father manually typed into an old typewriter, which I still have at home, I believe it captures the effect of EO 9066 and the evacuation order on the people, old and young alike, that were being forcibly removed from their homes and relocated to a strange place they had never been before. The ramifications of the internment, I'll say, drastically changed my father's life and impacted his life from there forward, as well as the rest of his family.
This is incomprehensible for those of us who live the lives that we live now. And I can only imagine the strength that was required by everyone as their lives were uprooted. So after this train ride, at which internment camp was your father interned?
So my father and his family were interned at the Poston internment camp and assigned a space in Block 21, Building 8A. It sounds like an apartment, but it was far from it. It was the barracks were wood frame, tar paper, no insulation, no heating. The family spaces at that time were separated only by burlap strung from the ceiling. There were common latrines and mess hall, medical facilities, but it was a very austere environment where the War Relocation Authority had built the camp. Like I said, most of the Poston was established on the Colorado River Indian Reservation despite the objections of the tribal council there, who had said at the time, we do not want to be inflicting the same injustice that was done to us to another group. So despite the objections of the Colorado River Indian Tribal Council, the camp was built. The Del Webb Corporation was selected to construct the camp. You might recognize Del Webb, best known for later building Sun City, Arizona. At the time, the first part of Poston was constructed in 3 weeks, and the first interns were expected to help finish the construction of the camp along with Del Webb. So they were using labor from the internees to help build the rest of the camp. The internees were also responsible for growing some of their own food, for teaching their own schools, their children, for constructing their own community within the camp.
So what was a daily life like for your father and his sisters and his parents?
It was Poston, Arizona, in case you've never been there, is out in the middle of the desert, very harsh conditions, known for its high heat, blowing winds, dust storms. It was hard for the Japanese families who were relocated there to find a sense of dignity. Here they were, torn from their homes, held under suspicion by the government, and having to more or less make a life for themselves within the camp. At 32, my father was not a child, and he was one of the leaders of the community within the camp. Now, within the camp, there were different factions, and I'll describe each one really briefly. The older generation, the Issei, that were not U.S. citizens, who were mostly Japanese Americans who spoke Japanese, not English so much. Then there were their children who were born in the U.S., the Nisei, the second generation, who were born in the U.S. and considered the U.S. their home and were very American. Then there were the folks like my father who were born here but sent back to Japan for an education. They were the Kibei. And those were the three basic groups within the camp. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of debate about how they should all react to the internment. Most of the elders, I understand, promoted an approach that would comply with the camp authorities. Do what you're told, don't be a troublemaker. Nisei, most Nisei felt strongly that the internment was unjust and unconstitutional and resented the camp authorities and promoted maybe not defiance, but certainly not compliance with the internment process. The Kibei were tough because they were in between the two. There were some that more closely aligned with traditional Japanese, and there were some that more closely aligned with the U.S. There were a lot of attempts in the camp to try to create a life that resembled the life they had in Southern California. One request the internees made was to the University of Arizona to be allowed access to the library so they could get library books. They also requested for instructors from the university to come to the camp to help with continuing education. And those requests were made through the War Relocation Authority to the University of Arizona. The response they got was rather disappointing. So the president of the University of Arizona at the time, Alfred Atkinson, replied that, and this is close to a quote, but these people are our enemies regardless of their affiliation with the country. In other words, whether they be citizens or not. And he denied the use of access to the library books. He denied instructors to come to the camp, and said that the Board of Regents of Arizona unanimously agreed with the policy of not supporting the request for library books or instructions. So there was great division in Arizona, as I understand it, about how the internees should be treated. The Arizona Daily Star is on record with editorials that addressed the issue and citing that to the effect that we should be treating the internees as well as they have been accepting the treatment, so that we do not embarrass ourselves at the end of the war. So there was some debate within the state, within official government, as well as other organizations on campus. The campus affiliation of the American Civil Liberties Union published some editorials about the injustice of the internment. I believe the editor of the student paper on campus was threatened with expulsion for penning some editorials in favor of better treatment for the internees. I understand he was not expelled, but there was certainly a less than welcoming treatment from the University of Arizona and the Board of Regents. So within the camp, there was tension, there was consternation. Nobody wanted to be there. Everyone had their own approach to how to deal with it. My father's approach, and he didn't talk about this when he was alive. Most of what I found out is through research later, but my father decided that he should cooperate with the authorities as much as possible, despite what he wrote in his little missive about this doesn't look like America anymore, and how much suffering there was. He was a intermediary between the camp authorities and the internees. That I've uncovered some information that says he provided information to the FBI on fellow internees who were subversive in nature. That is unsubstantiated. I haven't been able to get to the bottom of it yet, but there were rumors in the camp that my father was cooperating with the authorities, being a little too helpful. So he and his family were subject to threats and physical harm while interned. There's some records that my father was subject of an attack one night that put him in the hospital. Both of his parents were injured by assailants coming to their quarters in the middle of the night, mostly because of actions they believed my father was complicit in that was not what other internees wanted to see happen. So there was great tension, great animosity within different groups within the camp. My father eventually had the authorities, and I found this out through some documentation I found in the congressional record, a hearing that was held in 1943, the Subcommittee on Un-American Activities were interviewing camp authorities about treatment of some of the internees. And my father's name was mentioned in the congressional record, and the camp authorities were asked if he was helpful or cooperative with the camp authorities, and the response was that yes, he was very helpful, which was good news and bad news, because that was one of the reasons why he and his family were being threatened inside the camp, because they were viewed as being a little too helpful to the camp authorities. One of the biggest ironies in the internment was that the U.S. Army was seeking Japanese-speaking Americans and translators for help with the war effort. So the Army would come to the camp looking to recruit from the internees. It had to be one of the most ironic situations, where being held in a camp, being patrolled by guards wearing U.S. Army uniforms, and the Army was coming to recruit you to help with the war. Nonetheless, it turns out my father decided to enlist in the Army while he was still in the camp. He had to be, removed secretively at night from the camp under the guise that he had contracted measles and needed to be quarantined. That was the cover story they gave, so to help from retribution against his family. Didn't really work, but that's how they got him out of camp. He enlisted in the Army, was sent to the Military Intelligence Service in Camp Savage, Minnesota, where he was part of the Military Intelligence Service language school, helping the U.S. Army with things like translation, interrogation, some code breaking, and teaching U.S. military about Japanese culture.
What a fascinating change, evolution, some by force, to get us to the point where we are now, where we've learned that your family has been interned and they're adapting as best they can. And I think that we should take a moment to ponder this and then look further into your father's life going forward.
I think it's a great idea. I really view my father's enlistment in the Army from the camp as probably the turning point in his life. Prior to that, I would describe him as a content, happy, successful person living in the Japanese American community in Southern California. Well respected, successful. From all I can tell from the photographs I've come across in his books, very happy, very popular until that point. And the division that was caused within the camp about how to cooperate with the government over the internment was really a turning point in his life, in the rest of his family's life. His parents, his sisters, they suffered because of decisions that he made. And I think it really set a course for the next chapter of his life. It's a good place to pause.
Thank you.